Hey students, I'm going to talk through how to do a plot chart. We're going to look at the text Fish Cheeks that we have read and talk through how we would fill in this plot chart, and then you're going to be able to practice this on your own. So if you have a blank plot chart with you as you're watching this video, you can pause the video as we're going, make notes, and write some things down as we go. With the plot chart, I would always want you to start with your title and your author, just so you have the right story going on your plot chart. So we will be doing Fish Cheeks, and our author is Amy Tan. Okay, so let's get into the text, and let's start with the exposition down here. When we're talking about exposition, we're talking about the beginning of the story. This is where the author is creating a setting, introducing us to characters, and giving us the situation. What is the scenario at the very beginning of the text? So let's look at our text. In the first paragraph, we learned that this is being told through Amy's perspective because she's using I, so obviously Amy would be a character that we want to write down. She brings up the minister's son. His name is Robert, which we learn a little later in this paragraph. And we also learned in the second paragraph that Amy's parents had invited the minister's family over for Christmas Eve dinner. And then we see that she was very, very upset that they were invited over, and she has all of these questions, like what would he think of our shabby Chinese Christmas? What would he think of our noisy Chinese relatives? And she has all of these questions that she's kind of stewing in her mind, okay? So we're going to go back to the plot chart, and we're just going to fill in this exposition first. So what is the setting? Where and when does the story take place? Well, we're in Amy's home for Christmas Eve dinner. That's what we learned in those first two paragraphs. The situation is that Amy's mother has invited a family over for dinner on Christmas Eve, and Amy has this crush on the boy. His name's Robert, and is embarrassed by the Chinese dinner. And then what characters do we know so far? We know Amy, we know Mom, we know Robert, and then both people, both Amy and Robert's families are involved in this dinner. So that basically covers the exposition. The exposition is just where you're setting up the story if you're writing it, or if you're reading a story where the writer is setting up the story for you. It's really important that we get the setting, where the story takes place, so the reader can get a picture in their mind of where we are. And it's also important that we set up those characters and give a little description of them so that the reader can start picturing your characters out as well. Okay, so as soon as I do the exposition, I want to go into the conflict and see, well, what is the actual issue? And we learned in those first two paragraphs already that Amy's very embarrassed by her family traditions. All of these questions, those kind of signify all of Amy's concerns. And then if we go down into paragraph 3, she starts talking about the kind of food that her mom is creating this meal for. She says she's created a strange menu. She goes into a description of all of the foods, like rock called with bulging eyes, pleaded not to be thrown into a pan of hot oil. So she's using these sensory details to describe how she feels like the food is so disgusting. So when we get into our conflict, we want to say Amy is embarrassed by her family traditions. Alright, after the conflict, I know what the problem is. I want to go ahead and jump to the climax up here, okay? And the climax is that part of the story where everything in the story has been leading to this moment, and it's the most intense moment, okay? This is basically where the conflict is the most relevant in the story, and it's basically being dealt with. So we want to think about, okay, where was the conflict actually being dealt with? Because if the conflict's not being dealt with, then the event is just a rising action. So let's go into our text. We've basically talked through paragraph 3, where the mom is creating the meal, and then we have the minister's family arrives in paragraph 4. So in paragraph 4, they arrive. Paragraph 5, this is where the relatives start doing things that are embarrassing. Paragraph 6, the father leans back and belches. And then paragraph 7, this is where Amy and her mom have that special moment. After everyone had gone, my mother said to me, "You want to be the same as American girls on the outside." She handed me an early gift. It was a mini skirt and beige tweed. "But inside you must always be Chinese. You must be proud you are different. Your only shame is to have shame." And so this moment is really the climax of the story, because the frustration Amy has been having is with specifically her mother. She's been upset at her mother and embarrassed by her family, but her mother's making this traditional Chinese meal. And so when Amy goes and has this conversation with her mom, and her mom gives her a mini skirt, which represents American culture, but also tells her, like, you've got to be proud that you're different. You've got to be proud of your heritage. That's the peak moment in the story. So if we go into our climax, we can say Amy's mom wants her to be proud of being Chinese. And then now we can go down and look at all of the events that led to that climax. So like the first one, Amy's mother invites Robert's family over for Christmas dinner. And then we learn that meal is a traditional Chinese meal. Amy's embarrassed by her family. And then Amy's mom gives her that American Christmas present, which leads to her mom wants her to be proud of being Chinese. Okay, so from this point, then we think about, what is the following action? What happens after this moment? After this moment, Amy realizes her mother prepared all of her favorite foods for Christmas dinner. We find that in the next part of the text. Right here, for Christmas Eve that year, she had chosen all of my favorite foods. And then as a result of understanding that, we know the resolution is that Amy realizes the gift of her culture and that her mother was attempting to give her her love, and she was trying to show that she really cares about her. And then from that, we understand this theme: don't be ashamed of your culture, which a lot of you brought out in class. And thinking about the protagonist versus the antagonist, who is the person that we're kind of for in this story, that would be the main character, Amy. And then Amy is also her own, she's creating her own conflict because she's the one that is experiencing the conflict. It would be different if she's frustrated with her mom, but she's frustrated with her mom because she doesn't have a good understanding of what she wants to value personally in herself. The mom isn't mad at Amy. Amy's upset with her mom, and then we learn that really there's something deeper in Amy going on that's causing the frustration, and that is that she doesn't feel necessarily comfortable in her own skin. Okay, so that's just my tips on how to fill out the plot chart. I really, really suggest that after you kind of get the exposition, the conflict, and this protagonist versus antagonist figured out, go ahead and do the climax and then go to the rising action and the falling action. I think if you identify the climax first, that will help you later in the text.